Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have a really interesting and increasingly relevant conversation that's going to take place today about the many ways in which our faith communities in Georgia are engaging in climate solutions and how these solutions are benefiting congregations and local communities. If you are joining a Drawdown Georgia webinar for the first time, welcome. As you may know, Drawdown Georgia is an initiative of the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. We launched in 2020 after 2 years of research on the most effective and most available climate solutions that would be specific to the state of Georgia. So we have laid out 20 of those solutions. They're available on our website. Since then, we have created resources and tools for people working on those climate solutions in Georgia and for interested citizens who want to learn more about how to make your homes more energy efficient, how to evaluate EV purchases, how to compost at your home and in your community, and much, much more. We invite you to visit our website to sign up for our biweekly climate digest that aggregates climate solutions news from across the state, to access our toolkits, and to get to know the resources that we have on our website, like an emissions tracker, which lets you see greenhouse gas emissions at the county level in Georgia and lets you see how they change over the course of the years. So there's lots of resources available to you. We are fortunate to have a really strong network across the state of all kinds of folks from all walks of life working on climate solutions. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about some of the faith communities in Georgia and some of the really interesting and meaningful work that they're doing on climate solutions, and how some of their work is impacting some of the recovery that's going to begin happening after the storms this past weekend. So I would again like to welcome you, and now I'll turn it over to Hannah Shultz from Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, who will moderate our discussion today. Hannah?
Thank you so much for having us today. It's really great to be here with all of you. My name is Hannah. I'm the program director at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, also known as GIPL. We're an environmental interfaith nonprofit, and our mission is to work with faith communities across the state to help them organize green teams and congregations, implement practical climate solutions like energy efficiency, solar, EV charging stations on site, and advocate for more just policies. We've worked closely with the Drawdown team over the past several years to think about how we might help congregations implement the Drawdown solutions. We believe that these solutions are a great roadmap for both individuals and congregations. A lot of times when I work with faith communities, I get the question, well, what can I do to address the climate crisis? And I think one of the biggest barriers to people taking meaningful action is knowing where to begin. It can feel really overwhelming. And so what I love about the Drawdown solutions is that they provide very practical answers to this question. These are very concrete things that people can do. And I think a lot of these solutions feel very accessible. It's things like energy efficiency upgrades, things like composting, things that individuals and congregations might already be doing or thought about doing. And GIPL is here to work with congregations to help them think about how they might implement these solutions. We have really designed our programs around the Drawdown Georgia solutions. And so we're really thinking about how congregations can increase things like composting, recycling, EV charging, tree planting. And we believe that faith communities can be such great leaders in this work. We know that almost every major faith tradition has an ethic of caring for the natural world and our neighbors. And so faith communities are really well positioned to be role models in their communities, to show people in their congregations what's possible and to lead the way. And there are so many good examples of how faith communities across the state are implementing these solutions and doing this work. And so I'm really excited to be here today with some leaders from a couple of different faith traditions who are working in their own faith community and with faith communities across the state and the region to implement these solutions and really model what's possible. And so welcome to our panelists. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists and then turn it over to them to share a little bit about their work. But first, we have Reverend Jenny Phillips with us. She is the Director of Environmental Sustainability at Global Ministries, which includes the United Methodist Committee of Relief, the Worldwide Humanitarian Relief and Development Agency of the United Methodist Church. She pilots and integrates sustainability practices for agency operations and programs, including domestic and international disaster response, global health, and agriculture. And she works with faith communities on solar, energy efficiency, land use, waste management, and other programming. Jenny has a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York and a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from the University of Washington, and she's based in Decatur, Georgia. So welcome, Jenny. We also have Meher Boudair with us. He is a civil and environmental engineer by training and a father of 4. He has lived in the northern Atlanta suburbs for over 25 years, and during that time has leveraged his training to aid the larger nonprofit community, as well as the Muslim communities across the area, to be more thoughtful and resourceful in the design and operation of their organizations and buildings. He's one of the founders of Amana Academy Charter School and the Roswell Community Masjid, and has served on both of their boards, as well as serving as the RCM Executive Director. Meher is board source certified board governance trainer and is a graduate of UT Austin and UCF. Welcome, Meher. And lastly, we have Joanna Kobe-Lipker, who is the director of Adama Atlanta, a local chapter of the National Adama Organization, working to connect people and planet in Atlanta through Jewish environmental organization, climate action, and youth empowerment. She also serves as a Jewish community organizer for GIPL. Joanna received a bachelor's degree in economics from Barnard College and a master's degree in public health from Emory University. After working in project management for Emory Healthcare and Emory University for 10 years, Joanna pursued her passion for sustainability through various volunteer roles in the Atlanta public school system and her religious community. Her recent appointments with GIPL and Adama served to strengthen her commitment and abilities to promote environmental stewardship in the Jewish community. So welcome to all of you. And I will turn it over to Jenny first to share a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Hannah. It's really good to be here. My slides start on the next slide. Awesome, thank you. Yes, so I lead the environmental sustainability program at Global Ministries, and the program is grounded in the United Methodist social principles. And I wanted to share this excerpt from the Community of Creation section of the social principles. We affirm our sacred calling to be responsible stewards and to lovingly tend all God has wrought. We recognize the inherent worth of God's creation, celebrate Earth's abundance and diversity, and along with the entirety of the cosmos, give praise to its creator. We recognize we are interconnected members of complex ecosystems, intricate webs of all life, all of which have their origins in God's gracious act of creation. Now, this statement from the United Methodist Church, it's actually a revised piece that our General Conference just approved this year. As was mentioned earlier, many faith traditions have statements like this, grounding their values in the work of the divine being's creation and acknowledging the centrality of our work as stewards of creation. Part of my role is to lift up these values, because even though statements like this exist, they are not always at top of mind in the day-to-day life of the church, but they need to be, and they need to be given voice. And so one thing I hope you all will take away is that every one of us has a role in giving voice to the rich resources of our traditions and making sure they are heard and known in your communities. Next slide, please. As a response to this and other commitments by the United Methodist Church, the agencies of the United Methodist Church, which carry on various responsibilities for the denomination, have made a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 across ministries, facilities, operations, and investments. And we're committed to putting the gifts of our connection to work as we work to achieve equity and justice in building a net zero emission economy by 2050. So we are both committed to reducing our emissions, moving toward net zero, and also to doing it in a way that acknowledges that the impacts of climate change and of greenhouse gas emissions disproportionately affect those who already experience historic disadvantages, poverty and racism, and other disadvantages that make them at greater risk for climate change. And so the solutions need to put those folks and those voices at the forefront, and those needs at the forefront. Next slide, please. So I'm going to take just a couple minutes to share a little bit about some of the ways that we are bringing this commitment to the fore at Global Ministries. One of the areas we engage in is in disaster response in the US and internationally. And so we're looking at strategies for saying, how can we respond cleaner and greener? Historically in the US, a disaster response typically includes diesel generators that are, folks, as we know with Helene, have lost power. And so, of course, they need electricity to be able to get their basic functions up and running again. And generators have been the answer, but we know that running those generators puts more emissions in the air, those drivers of extreme weather events through climate change. And so to stop that cycle, we are starting to experiment. Well, we've been experimenting for a couple of years now with integrating solar in our disaster response, with trailers equipped with solar panels, inverters, and batteries that can be towed into, you can see here, this is a photo from Florida in 2022. The sites where responders are working to provide energy to responders and to communities. The image on the left is a technology that we're just beginning to work with. It's an atmospheric water generator, because another big need in disaster is water. And the solution historically has been to ship in bottled water, which create, I won't get into bottled water, but I expect this audience has an awareness that it is not the best thing for the planet. But this draws humidity out of the air and purifies it to make it into drinking water. And so, especially in places like the Southeast, there's just abundant humidity to be able to make water for people to drink. Next slide, please. We're also looking at ways to be more sustainable in water, sanitation, and hygiene and healthcare. And we're using similar technologies, looking at how we can stop using, when we're working in low-income contexts with low energy access. We work with clinics around the world, including in places where people may not have access to the grid and rely on, again, generators, diesel generators, to be able to power their medical clinics. We're integrating solar at sites that we work with so that they have abundant electricity without the noise and fumes that are not healthy for patients. And we're looking at ways to be more sustainable with water when we're engaged in situations where currently bottled water is being used. How can we look at other strategies to bring in safe and healthy water for folks? Next slide, please. Another thing that we work on is training and equipping local churches so they can be looking at their sites, their resources, their contacts, and the issues that they're grappling with, and figure out how they can integrate their environmental values into the solutions they bring and the ministries in which they engage. One of the ways we do this is through the Global Ministries Earth Keepers program. And I notice on the participant list, there are a number of Global Ministries Earth Keepers in the audience. So I'm really glad you're here. Feel free in the comments section, the chat section, to say a word about the projects you're working on, because people might be interested in hearing about them. But this is a program where United Methodist apply with an idea that they want to execute in their contexts. And through the training, we work with them on their project to help them figure out how best to organize it, how best to tell the story, how they can engage their project through an anti-racist lens, so that they're really thinking about anti-racism in their project development as part of our commitment to equity and justice. We're having our next training starting this week, actually, and I'm really excited for it. Next slide, please. Another way that we're working on equipping local churches and partnering with others, including GIPL and IPL, is on identifying sources of funding for congregations to implement their projects. One of the things that we're working on with GIPL is demystifying and improving the process for church entities to file for direct pay. I won't get into that at this moment because I know our time is short, and then partnering with one of our annual conferences on providing education for the Renew America's Nonprofit grant. That's all I have to share right now, but I know there will be more opportunity to dive into these things later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenny, and excited to ask you some more specific questions about some of those technologies in a little bit. Pass it on to Maher now.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. This is really an amazing and inspiring conversation already. I appreciate what Reverend Phillips already introduced. It's really something that's common among faith groups, that really living up to our values. That's really the challenge at the bottom line, knowing what we know now. So I represent Roswell Community Masjid. It's one of several mosques in the area, in northern suburbs in Atlanta. From the inception, RCM has committed to being green and doing the right thing. And we actually partnered with GIPL on projects in the very early stages. We opened our doors in 2008. By 2011, we were operating in a small, humble building, yet GIPL reached out and we were able to partner on creating some energy projects to help the community make the building more efficient and do what it can to make an impact. At this point in our evolution, we're blessed enough to be able to think about our next campus, designing our next campus. And this is where we went back to the principles of doing the right thing and being good stewards of our blessings and the resources that we are blessed with. And we scanned different concepts in how to approach this capital campaign. And we landed on what's called the living building concept. And the reason for that, if we can go to the next slide, this is a rendering of our future campus at the entrance at the plaza. The reason we landed on the living building concept is because it's really more holistic and encompassing of social as well as material ideas on how to do the right thing. It does include equity and justice. It does include the beauty. It does include respecting the place that we're in addition to conserving water and energy and materials and so forth. So we thought this is a perfect model for us to kind of be able to express our values and help our community and the larger community kind of appreciate these values and live them. Another aspect of the living building that it is, if we can go to the next slide, please. It's something that is not only about building the building, but it's also how it performs and how it, over its lifetime, stewards the resources and what kind of impact, psychological impact, social impact does it have on the community. So it's really a holistic approach to creating new capital projects. It's a super ambitious project for a small organization like ours, but we are hoping that the impact will be beyond just our community. We're hoping it will be a pilot for many other communities to engage in the conversation and move forward on creating solutions that are mindful of our environment, mindful of our community, and beneficial to both. One of the great things about the living building concept, it also reminds us how to not only be efficient in what we're doing and in using resources, but also how to avoid harm. How to avoid harm to the environment, how to avoid harm to anybody who is engaged in the supply chain of anything we use in the build. So it's really very exciting opportunity. We're hoping we can perform and execute in the coming years. It'll take us 2 to 3 years, hopefully, to God willing, we can complete the project and engage the larger North Fulton community in the conversation about doing the right thing. If we can go to the next slide, please. So one of the aspects of, like I mentioned, equity and beauty and psychological well-being, which means connection to nature. So we made sure that we're preserving a good portion of the sites as a green space, and making sure that is a communal green space that can be enjoyed by the community and can also reflect, have reflection spaces for the community, and as well as gathering spaces. Next slide will show probably some of the lumber that we have. This is vintage lumber, 75-year-old barn that was on the site. We actually partnered with local partners. LBC is one of them, to deconstruct the barn piece by piece by hand and preserve the wood so that we can repurpose it in our build. It's one of the aspects of respecting the place and also commemorating what was already in the space, and continue to allow it to live and benefit others. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is the entrance, the lobby of the future building, the mosque building. And again, the design is very simplistic, very respectful of the environment, uses natural light, all these things that impact us spiritually, socially, and facilitate our connection to nature and express our respect to the environment. So we hope this, again, will be just a start for a larger conversation in the larger community, and hopefully it'll be a pilot that we're more than happy to share our experience. And throughout the process, we're documenting the project as much as we can. And we're hoping to share our experience with others so that they can do even better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maher. I think this is such an inspiring project, and really excited to be working with you on this and to learn from y'all and see how other faith communities might be able to implement some of those building aspects that you just talked about into their congregations as well. I will turn it over to Joanna now.
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm really honored to actually represent both Adama and GIPL, as I represent the Jewish communities for both. You can go to the next slide. Adama is the largest Jewish environmental organization in North America, and our mission is to cultivate vibrant Jewish life and deep connection with the earth, catalyzing culture change and systemic change through immersive experiences, Jewish environmental education, leadership development, and climate action. And I will explain what that means here in Atlanta. And so geographically, we have two retreat centers. One is in Baltimore and one is in Connecticut in Falls Village. And we have a lot of training programs there for actually training future farmers. And we have 5 community impact hubs, and Atlanta is one of those 5. You can go to the next slide. So what we do in Atlanta is we take the national mission and we really do the work here in Atlanta. So what we do in Atlanta is we connect people and planet in greater Atlanta through Jewish environmental education, climate action, and youth empowerment. So what that really looks like is we do a lot of, our education can look like going into a 5th grade classroom and talking about the connection to some of our ancient Jewish customs and rituals and how that really is a celebration of harvest cycles, honoring the earth. Almost all of our holidays are tied to some sort of agrarian cycle. So we like to kind of elevate that for children, really all ages benefit from that lesson. And some of our education can also look very hands-on. We do a lot of tree plantings, we do river cleanups, and we do a lot of education around pollinators, to really getting people to better understand the importance of the birds and the bees and all the insects and how they have a vital role in our ecosystem. Climate action is really kind of our powerful engine where we really help people with their climate solutions. So this is where we work heavily with Jewish institutions themselves. We work with synagogues, schools, camps, organizations, and we help them with decarbonizing their buildings. And we do a lot in partnership with GIPL. And youth empowerment is a newer program for us. And we are really working with Jewish teens. So this can be in a group that meets as part of their high school, or it could be a youth group in their synagogue or in their community. And we really give them tools to sort of express some of the climate anxiety that a lot of our teens are feeling right now, and give them strategies, tools that they can actually use to see and be the change that they want to see. We can guide them to, write letters or ask their schools, why do we have water bottles everywhere? Can we not have single-use plastic? Can we recycle? Can we compost? It's really giving them the tools that they can lead change. We also do programs with college students on college campuses as well. You can go to the next slide. And it's worth kind of sharing, how do we do this? Because as Hannah mentioned, this is really overwhelming work. It really is hard for any individual, anyone part of a community to really, where do I even begin? And so we sort of try to help people by doing this work in 3 ways. So we provide gentle accountability. So we have an infrastructure called the Jewish Climate Leadership Coalition. And this is a free network that any Jewish institution can join. And by joining, you have access to a lot of our national tools. You have access to some funding options. And really, you don't have to come up with what you have to do. So every year you put together what we call a climate action plan, which is really a checklist so that you go through and you can answer a question of, what have you done to decarbonize your building? Have you installed solar? Have you looked into renewable energy in different ways? And so it's not a blank piece of paper where an individual has to come up with what they need to do. We've already identified these are the ways that you can really get to net zero emissions for your building, and we're here to help you. And here in Atlanta, we have 11 institutions that have joined. Nationwide, there are about, I think, 350 institutions. So that's the gentle accountability. We say it's gentle because no one gets in trouble. We meet everyone where they are, and anything they do is great. We celebrate it all. We build community, and that's the part where we do this work together. We do it joyfully, and that's where we have our tree plantings. The picture in the bottom right is some Jewish teens making what we call seed balls. So these are wildflower seeds, and then you mix it with clay, and then they dry, and then you can pollinate or you can plant these wildflowers wherever you see any kind of green space. And that's, again, community is just coming together, but having sort of a climate purpose of why we're together. And we offer resources and support. And that's the really very critical to enable and empower people to do this work. We give them the tools, we can point them to funds like the GIPL grants that a lot of our institutions are a part of. And we also give them some coaching. And I think what's nice about the coalition is it's this network. So there could be one institution here in Atlanta that's very similar to an institution in another city, and they can share best practices. So no one has to start from scratch. And that is it for my slides. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you again to each of you for sharing just a little bit about the work that you're doing. I'm excited to ask you some questions and dive into some of these projects in more detail. I also wanted to let all of our participants know that if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A feature in the chat at the bottom of your screen, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of this session, and we'll do our best to also answer questions as we go as well. But the first question that I have for all of you, so you've each touched on a little bit of your faith tradition's values and talked around living into these values and why that's important. But I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about why you think it's important that faith communities are implementing these climate solutions. What are some of the impacts that we're expecting to see from faith communities? Like, why are we organizing in this space in particular?
Happy to start on that if you don't mind. I can think of two reasons really that I believe faith community must lead the way. One is the connection with the values. If we fail in making that connection, that doing the right thing is part of our values, being mindful of consumer, hyper consumerism, and avoiding wasting resources is a value that is connected to faith, as well as again avoiding harm. So that that makes it really a responsibility of the faith-based community to lead, to make that connection. Another thought is really that faith-based institutions are normally there to be there for the long term, and anything we do structurally within our organization, any impact is likely to last a very long time. And businesses sometimes they plan around a 10 or 20-year life cycle, where a faith-based organization are there for a lifetime, and hence our name of the project, Vision 99, really is for it to last for a generation and after generation. So any impact can be multiplied over time.
Go ahead, Joanna, I'll go last.
Okay. I actually meant to share in my opening the name Adama. Adama means earth. And so in Genesis, we learn man, Adam, was created from Adama, from the earth, from the soil. And so there's just this, from the beginning of time, we are made from the earth. And so there's this built-in understanding that we can't destroy that from which we are made. Not that we're only motivated by guilt and shame, but just sort of, this is part of who we are. We are one with the earth. It is us. And so that's a guide. Also, just if you look, historically, the faith community is often the voice of representing those that are victims of injustice. And so it goes back even to, we all know civil rights here in Atlanta. A lot of faith leaders came together. If you look even farther back in time, around the turn of the century, during when there were people working in coal mines, it was the faith community that said these are unjust work conditions for people. And so it is the people of faith that speak up for those, and they sort of push us to honor life. And so I think that's kind of a universal value that we bring.
I just want to add the kind of tagging on with what you're saying, Joanna, about a connection to history and tradition and long-term commitment to justice, is that we're grounded in stories that extend across many, many, many generations. And our scriptures teach about so many situations where people faced just a challenge that was unsurmountable or felt unsurmountable, and they committed to working on that challenge, whether or not they knew if they would see the resolution. And climate change is exactly that kind of challenge. And so we have a reservoir of resources to strengthen us, our spirits and our hearts. And we also have these wonderful networks, so that I know that when I am done working for the day on climate change and I go to bed at night, there are folks in other parts of the world who are getting up to pick up the baton and take that work. And so we have a sense that we are not alone, that we are part of a much larger group of people around the world working together, and part of a much larger story. And those are real sources of strength.
I love that so much. And I love hearing, there's some differences in each of our faith traditions of the language that we use and the stories that we tell, but the ethic is the same. And that's what's kind of running throughout these traditions and kind of building the story about why we should care. At GIPL, we talk a lot about how there are over 15,000 houses of worship across Georgia. And so I think, it's clear from this conversation today that we all share this ethic of caring for God's creation and of stewarding the earth. And then we think about those 15,000 houses of worship, and we think about the land and the buildings and the people in those faith communities, and how much, strength we have in community. And so I'm thinking about, all of those buildings and the ways that we can be more efficient in energy use in those buildings. I'm thinking about the land that those congregations sit on and the ways that we can better steward that land. And each of you has started to share some examples of some of the specific projects that you're working on. But I would love to dive into maybe one or two kind of examples of things that you're working on, either with your own faith community or with a faith community that you're working alongside. What's one or two examples of a really concrete solution that faith communities are implementing that's kind of bringing you inspiration in this work?
I'd be glad to share a little bit about our disaster response efforts in the wake of Helene. As you all know, especially with a Georgia-focused audience, although I know we have folks from elsewhere as well, a devastating hurricane and tropical storm has hit huge swaths of the southeastern United States, and many, many people are without power and water. The United Methodist Church through UMCOR has significant disaster response programming where local conferences are able to organize. They're trained throughout the blue sky parts of the year and organizing how they will respond when disaster strikes. And then those networks go to work in times like this. One of the first resource deployments that happened in Georgia was a solar trailer that, by the way, was a partnership between our partners at Footprint Project and our partners at the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, who are in partnership with Drawdown Georgia. And we're so grateful for the Ray C. Anderson Foundation support for a large solar trailer that's providing power now at a response site in Valdosta. And we're working with our partners at Footprint to deploy trailers in Florida and deploy solar resources in North Carolina, particularly focused around the Asheville area. To get ready for things like that, we train volunteers. We're training folks to be able to use this equipment so when the time comes, they're prepared. And we're growing our resources by developing a sustainable response technology library where by next year, we're going to have a number of smaller solar resources that folks engaged in the disaster program can try out and see if they want to have these resources in their local tool libraries. to just expose more people to solar and how doable it is to use it in times like this.
I think that's so fantastic. And one of the new programs that GIPL's developing right now is a resilience hub program. So thinking about how we equip congregations and faith communities to be these hubs in times of disaster, to serve as donation centers or shelters. So thinking about those things like solar and battery storage, water storage, food pantries, community gardens, kind of all of the things that would go into serving a community, like you said, both in like blue sky conditions and then also when disasters hit. So really looking forward to working with you more on this, and was excited to hear how you're deploying the solar trailer and some other solutions.
Yeah, can I say one more thing in relation to that? One of the
Yeah.
things that we're thinking about more is what infrastructure is needed on a house of worship to be able to then bring in more resources effectively in a disaster. Because we recognize that, for example, sometimes a house of worship will put solar on the building but can't afford the batteries. But with a switchover switch installed, you can pull up a trailer full of batteries, connect it to that solar, and suddenly there's power flowing. So another thing to think about is just how can you, as you're planning resilience, connect with your tradition's disaster response programming to think about how you can partner and share that vision.
That's great. And Maher, I would love to hear a little bit more from you about kind of how you're incorporating some of these resilient strategies into the living building, because I know that a lot of those same things that really help to cut carbon emissions are also helping to make that building more resilient as well.
Absolutely. And this is actually an amazing aspect that really drew us to this principle, because the living building is not supposed to be just efficient, but also to be resilient. And we're actually in the middle of the design process with the engineers, the discussions going on, how to build the resiliency in terms of power, in terms of providing water, in terms of creating a space that is a sanctuary in an event of a local disaster for the surrounding community. Obviously, regardless of faith, this is going to be a sanctuary, and the going through the living building process and the details and the design and the engineering is an amazing exercise that helps us kind of think of all the possibilities and all, we're creating a new capital project that's significant. It would be a missed opportunity if we don't make the best of it in terms of resiliency and in terms of being a sanctuary for the community. So that's definitely to bring back, that into action, though, and to kind of help our community ramp up to those principles and level of awareness and education. We're actually implementing a lot of the principles in our current humble space. We started our programs, environmental education programs in our current space. We started our composting program with the help actually from GIPL as well, to raise the awareness of the community and make sure that our small everyday actions matter and do have impact, and we need to make good choices in our small everyday actions.
Yeah, I love that idea of making the small impacts, because I think a lot of times people think that you have to like do these really big projects, but it can be something small, like starting to compost in your home or with your house of worship, and see how that grows from there and inspires more action. And Joanna, I feel like you have a lot of examples of kind of smaller projects that have built into much bigger initiatives with some of the faith communities that you've worked with.
Yes, thank you. I was going to talk about two programs. One is a program that GIPL has started, the Rewilding Program. So houses of worship are often the largest landowners in Georgia, and a lot of faith communities have these campuses. Some even just have a small green space, but there is this pressure to have, curbside appeal. And so most congregations just sort of have grass and they mow it. Maybe there's some flowers. And there is really interest in, could we be better? Could we have a gas-free landscaping plan. And so we are working with congregations to rewild their green space to the extent that they can, and the extent that's still aesthetically pleasing, but also responsible and mindful. So we are offering small grants to a few institutions. And so there is one synagogue we're working with in Roswell, and they have a really large green space sort of behind their main building, and it's somewhat overgrown, and they want to sort of maintain it in a way that still is natural but usable. And so there's work to evaluate, is there ivy that's growing up the trees that we can kind of trim back to preserve the health of the trees? Are there more native plants that we can introduce here to maintain, green, and also introducing native plants, because they thrive best in the climate and the soil that they are intended for. So really kind of introducing those solutions to some of our congregations and really encouraging them to reconsider your standard mow and blow. So no gas powered tools. Another big program that we do a lot is around zero waste. And that's a lot of congregations here just feel really stuck. They have these events, maybe there's 100 people. It's not really realistic to expect them to have a dishwasher that can always accommodate washing dishes for 100 people on a regular basis, though some do, and we commend those. So a lot of institutions have disposable, and we try to offer some solutions that are more manageable and more feasible. So number one, no styrofoam. So really encouraging all institutions, if you do nothing else, get rid of styrofoam, full stop, it's terrible. Nothing will be cheaper than styrofoam, but there's a point where just because it's the cheapest, you can pay a little bit more and have a better material. So we try to encourage paper versus styrofoam or plastic. If you can use reusable, that's really the gold standard. And so I'll just share at my congregation, we sort of have a hybrid approach where on Saturdays we use compostable plates, and we actually compost them. So we partner with Compost Now, and we use real forks. So it's easier to wash a bunch of forks than a whole bunch of plates and cups. So that's sort of our approach to being more mindful of the amount of waste that we generate. And so we try to offer solutions to these congregations. Are you in an area where you can have a compost service come and pick up your compost? In which case, definitely use compostable plates and such. And when you can use reusable, maybe if you have small board meetings, use a real cup, drink that coffee from a mug. It tastes better than it does in a cup. So we try to, encourage them to make better choices. And yes, as Jenny mentioned, the water bottles, they're just everywhere. So really, I don't know anyone that doesn't have some kind of reusable water bottle. Just bring it, leave it in your car. And so just with a smile, we gently encourage these solutions. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanna. One other program that I'm hoping you can circle back on a little bit, you had mentioned earlier that you have tools for helping children and students express climate anxiety. Would love to hear a little bit more about how you're engaging youth in some of this work generally, and then also specifically kind of to combat some of this eco-anxiety.
Yes, thank you. I was going to work that into my answer. We have, there's a program called the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, and that is part of our national Adama programs. And you basically create a local chapter, and it's truly teen driven. So if anyone knows a teen, they don't like being told what to do from an adult. I have two of them. And so we really try to give them options. And, the chapter is structured in a way that they create a chapter, there is an adult sponsor, but really they decide what are the projects you want to work on. And so for the chapter that I was a part of at my congregation, we brainstormed around what is a climate solution that we can do here in this institution. And so those teens really wanted to build a pollinator garden on campus. And so we met up on a Sunday afternoon, and we cleaned this center area and de-weeded, and it was a lot of work for these teens. And we talked about why our pollinators are important. And I think that the physical work gave them, they felt empowered. They felt like, I'm doing something. I'm able to introduce pollinators to an area that previously was just a bunch of overgrown weeds and nothing was really growing there. So it's giving them ways that they can actually do something. Another great project that we did is our institution is part of this coalition, and we were trying to identify, why do we have so much paper in our trash when we pay for recycling? And so the teens went on a scavenger hunt where they had to go around to every single room in the building and identify which one is missing a recycling bin. And so that was their way of taking action, helping their institution solve this problem of, well, the problem is if you don't have a recycling bin in a classroom, chances are the paper is not going to make its way into the recycling bin. So it was really giving them tools to solve some of these problems. And then around advocacy, we did choose for one of our advocacy projects. We watched a documentary called Saving Juliet, and it's a true story, and this is about the community of Juliet, Georgia, near Macon. They are near Georgia Power Plant Shear, which has a coal ash pond, and the soil is toxic. There's contaminations that's affecting the groundwater, and there's really undeniable adverse health events that are happening to this community. And so the teens watched this documentary and wrote letters. And so they wrote letters to the lawmakers that have influence over this region to say, you need to support legislation that really demands that Georgia Power clean up these coal ash ponds. And so giving them the information and then something that they can do with it. And a lot of it is also being a listening circle to them, just allowing them to talk about what they're feeling. Sometimes it's just, they just want to be heard. And our teens also made a video about the Okefenokee Swamp, and the video highlighted what the threat is to the swamp. They even did research. They had background music. It was really cool. And in the end, they said, support House Bill, whatever it was, and this was, I think, 2 years ago. So at the time it was support this bill that will, I think, maybe deny future permits to the mining company. So again, it's giving them, these are issues facing, Georgians. This is some action you can take, and letting them kind of choose. So that's how we have done that. And then for younger kids, we don't show them depressing documentaries. We do it we engage with them in a different way. It's more, let's talk about the planting trees. Why is it important? And giving them some tools that they can take home to their homes. What are things that you can do? Even, a third grader can help their family reduce the amount of waste they generate, turn off the lights, maybe reduce their water use. So you're giving them appropriate action steps that they can take.
Yeah, I think that's great, and so excited that you're working with teens and youth. I mean, we talk a lot about how this is like the future that they're inheriting. And so I think that there's a lot of real anxiety there. And I know a lot of people's motivation for acting on climate and doing something about it is to, protect this future for their children and grandchildren. And expanding our youth programming is one of GIPL's goals for the next couple of years as well. So thank you for sharing some examples of how Adama is doing that. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about some of the barriers, because we know that there are these great solutions. Drawdown Georgia has given us this roadmap about what congregations can do, but we know there are still some really practical barriers and obstacles, challenges that faith communities are facing in implementing these solutions. So I'm wondering if each of you can share, what some of those barriers are that you've seen in this work and how you have overcome those barriers, what advice you have.
I'll jump in first. Since our project is pretty ambitious, the very first question we get from almost every group of stakeholders is, how can you justify the extra cost to go, for a living building concept? And obviously, this is part of education and part of awareness, raising the awareness in the community. Number one, the most important thing is the life cycle cost for a living building is way less than a traditional build. So if you account for the service lifetime of the building, how much how much less you spend on utilities, on dealing with issues that are solved by resiliency, by having the infrastructure to be much stronger and withstand the test of time, is the long-term answer. The short-term answer is really doing anything right and doing anything well is okay for it to cost a little bit more, and it's worth the price. Is sticking to our values and doing the right thing worth an extra 10% increase in cost? Going back to the simplest examples, I mean, if we always buy the cheapest styrofoam plate, we're not making an impact. We're dehumanizing our values. We're lowering our standards for the sake of short-term economic gain. So these are the kind of challenges that we have. It's always, obviously with the capital campaign, it's always about cost, but it's also an opportunity to turn that into an awareness program and a learning program opportunity, especially for the youth.
I'm hearing this theme where across all of us, we're talking about the need to help people think differently and change the way they approach the basic functions of faith community. And it's interesting how challenging it is, isn't it? I mean, even though in general, like, all the solutions that all three of us are offering that we've talked about today tend to make the world more pleasant, even in the immediate moment. I mean, like, Maher, the building you showed us is gorgeous. Oh my gosh. And has so much opportunity, both in the water and energy savings and also just in education. And Joanna, like, when I hear you talk about like a regular cup is much more pleasant than a paper cup, it sure is. You're right. And like, diesel generators that create fumes and noise versus batteries that are silent and fumeless, like, of course it's better, but it's a very important task to recognize that not everybody is where we are, and to try to meet them where they are and be patient as they work through their points of resistance, whatever they may be, and walk alongside them and bring them along. And we all have to discern how best to invest our time and energy, and when it makes sense, when someone isn't quite ready to walk along, to let them stay where they are and find others who are ready to walk along with us. Do you want me to say more about a challenge I've overcome, Hannah, or do we need to keep moving? Because I just did a little piece that wasn't answering your question.
No, I thought that was wonderful. But yeah, I think we're good on time. So I would love for you to also share if you have a challenge that you wanted to talk about. That would be great.
Well, I'll talk about a challenge that I have not overcome, if you're interested in that, but that we're working on together, and that's the direct pay program. And I saw Richard has some questions about direct pay, and so I put a link to some resources there. But the direct pay program is a program of the federal government to provide payments to nonprofit organizations, including houses of worship, that install solar or do EV chargers. There are a few different categories of energy devices that the government will provide payment of 30% back to an entity that installs these devices and then files for a payment. And then there are additional ways to increase that payment based on a variety of criteria. It's an incredible opportunity for any faith house of worship or nonprofit organization. Like, this doesn't happen where the government is giving money for capital improvements to church buildings and houses of worship buildings. But the process, as it is unfolding right now, is challenging. And so I just want to share about that, because I think it's really important. When something is new, it can be hard. And sometimes people come up with that first moment of difficulty and say, well, this will never work. This is not the right thing. And again, this is where I think leaders like you all come in to say, well, let's take a minute, let's learn more, let's see if we can be part of making the road and smoothing the road for others by working through these problems, partnering with organizations. That's why, Hannah, one of the many reasons Hannah and I are in conversation, but right now we're in a lot of conversation about this program. We're in conversation with Lawyers for Good Government, which I mentioned in the Q&A, and other organizations where we're taking our connections and building relationships to both say, well, what do we need to know so we can educate our communities? And what do the folks who are putting this program on in the federal government need to know about the unique nature of our communities? There's no one but us to be these bridges when we're engaging new technologies, when we're engaging new funding strategies. Like, if you feel called to be in that place, but you're not sure you belong there, you belong there. And we need you, because it just takes people willing to jump in and do the work.
Yes, absolutely. Joanna, you look excited to
yes,
build off
very, very quickly about challenges. A very frequent challenge that we get is when you say climate change, there's like a physical, whoa, I don't know, that's very political. I don't know, we can't really talk politics here. The board's not going to go for it. And so it's exhausting. We try to tell people there's nothing political about wanting clean air and clean water and clean soil for yourself and your children. So it's trying to better clarify what we mean by taking action. Why do we do this work? So sometimes I will sort of adjust my script to be, well, let's talk about energy efficiency. That's, we the money that we save by being more energy efficient, we can put into other aspects of our building needs, our mission. And this is honoring our values. And so you kind of try to remove any word that sounds political, but then you also can't be scared to say what it is. And so I kind of adjust. You have to read the room, you have to kind of see what people are going to respond to. But eventually you do need to get to a place where you do acknowledge there is a crisis that we need to take care of, and we can do that in different ways. And this is part of who we are. So just the initial challenges, some a reaction from the word climate that somehow it's too politically charged. And so that is a challenge. And I just wanted to echo to what Jenny said about you need to just be there in partnership and do the work with these institutions. And I could not echo that more. We cannot just, shake the like, you really should not have styrofoam. You need to be part of the solution. You need to say, I noticed there's styrofoam at the coffee bar. I did some research and I found that these cups are compostable and just as great. And they're only $4 more a week. Really, for $4, I think we should do that. So it's really offering a solution, really rolling up your sleeves, getting in there. Hannah and I have done dumpster dives for institutions to try to, you got to do the work a little bit. But yeah, just kind of say, we're all on the same side. We want it. Let's do this together.
I think that's such a great message to share, Joanna. And definitely a theme that I've heard kind of throughout all of your comments of like, how can we rally around something that we're passionate about? And a lot of that is like finding what your faith community is passionate about, and that might look different for a lot of different faith communities. And there's no exactly right way to do this. It's about finding kind of where your assets and resources and interests are, and then building off of those. Well, while we are talking about challenges, I know we had some questions in the chat about working specifically with utility companies and some of the requirements of solar. So a couple of things that I'll say on this. One, GIPL has a solar program. So we work with congregations to help them walk through the solar process, from getting proposals from installers to working with your utility company to get some of these specific questions answered, to finding funding and navigating the direct pay process. All of those things are kind of included in our SolarWise program. So I'll put my email address in the chat and would love to follow up with you one-on-one after this call to answer some of the specific questions that you might have about your congregation and working specifically on getting some backup power. But the other thing that I'll talk about, that we haven't talked about too much yet in this call today, although Joanna, you mentioned how the youth are kind of leading the way with advocacy, but I want to say that, a lot of these drawdown solutions we can implement in really practical ways through programs, things like putting rooftop solar on our buildings, things like doing really practical like energy efficiency retrofits. But we know that some of these solutions also require some policy change. And one of the ways that we get at this through GIPL is through our work with the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission is a 5-member statewide elected body who regulates Georgia Power. And they have an incredible amount of responsibility. They regulate things like where our energy comes from, what plants are operational or closing, how much customers are paying on utility bills, what kinds of solar policies we have, what kind of energy efficiency programs we have. And so we do a lot of education and training with people in our networks about these proceedings, about the Public Service Commission, about ways that people can get involved. And so I want to say, as you have questions about utility companies, about some of these policies, advocacy is a really great way to make sure that we have policies in place that allow us to implement solutions like energy efficiency and solar for congregations. We're actually partnering with Southface this fall to do a whole series of workshops on the upcoming integrated resource plan proceedings with the Public Service Commission that will happen in 2025. And we hope that you'll join us. I'll make sure that in the follow-up email that you all get a link to those events, to that event page on our website. But these are workshops to do a deep dive on who the Public Service Commission is, what to expect in this integrated resource plan, and ways that you can get involved. And next month, we'll be focusing specifically on climate equity in the IRP. And we know that we're planning to talk about the Drawdown Georgia work and solutions as part of this workshop as well. So wanted to put in a plug for that, and then also just kind of mention the importance of policy and advocacy in implementing these solutions as well. I know that our time is coming to a close. So I think the last question that I'll put to the panelists, and then we'll open it up for any other questions that folks have. But what's just one piece of advice that you want to leave folks with as they're thinking about how they might engage their congregations or faith communities in this work? Maybe just like a sentence or a little nugget that you want to share.
Work on something you love.
Everything matters. Everything has an impact.
I would reiterate the focus on the youth. Frankly, I'm being an engineer, pragmatic person. When the youth changes or adjusts their habits to do the right thing, that can have 50, 60-year impacts. So even the basic math, statistically, the youth impact will be much longer lasting, and hopefully they will pass it on as well.
I think that's great. Thank you so much. And thank you to each of you for the work that you're doing. We'll open it up now. If there are any other questions from participants that you want to ask to our panelists today. Great. So there's a question from an earthkeeper in Milwaukee who just finished an energy audit, and they're planning solar panels and heat pumps. So Jenny, this question I think is for you. You mentioned some ways to add in emergency battery loops. Where could they find additional funding for geothermal heat pumps? Yeah, so I think we'll start with that question.
Sure. So the Inflation Reduction Act includes funding for heat pumps. So, the direct pay program, which is part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And Catherine, know that there's already programming and resources out there that we're putting on the Creation Care Network, webinars and that kind of thing. But also know that in the United Methodist Church, we're doing some extra work to create some directions specifically for United Methodist. And as that becomes available, I'll share more. But there is funding available through the direct pay program to pay for 30% of geothermal heat pumps and more, depending on other markers of the project. We can talk about that more another time. And then adding in an emergency battery loop. That's something where you're getting battery, you already are buying batteries as part of your project development. Again, those qualify for direct pay funds, or there's an interconnection type switch that you can add to the building that allows allows an external power source to talk to your energy system. And we can talk about that more as well. If you want to send me an email, we can follow up on that.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny. Those direct pay tax credits are definitely one of the best ways to explore some of these clean energy projects. There's another question here about energy audits. So I'll take that one, and I'll say that GIPL has an energy efficiency program. So we provide low-cost energy audits to congregations. We help connect them to professional engineers who provide that audit, type up an audit report with customized recommendations for ways that they can implement or things that they can do to better improve the energy efficiency of their buildings. So again, I'll put my email in the chat and would love to follow up with you specifically with any questions that you have about energy audits, kind of how they work, what would be included in that report. And then GIPL actually also has some matching grant funds that we offer to congregations to help them implement those projects recommended in their reports. So we would love to work with your faith community on energy audits. Another question that we have is, how can we encourage a diverse collection of faith communities within our small town in rural Georgia? I'll open that up for any of you.
I'll share my some thoughts on this. The climate change topic will bring political questions. There is some people, for some reason, in their minds, they associate that with political divides and proving or unproving and so forth. And frankly, the way I uncouple that personally is stewarding resources should not be depending whether I can prove there is climate change or not. Doing the proper thing and dealing and respecting the use of the water supply and how we generate emissions and how we use energy and how we treat materials and how we avoid harm in the process is a human responsibility, regardless whether I can prove, or win an argument over climate change or politicize it in that way. That way, it's really more associated with the values, directly associated with the values. The fact is, we talked earlier, and I know Joanna mentioned the connection to heritage, and in the old days, nobody knew about the climate change, but they still, we have heritage in all our faiths that connects doing the right thing, respecting the resources, avoiding harm are all principles of humanity from day one. And that's the approach we need to take regardless of, the political arguments.
Thank you so much for that. I think we will close with this last question in the chat, which it says, in a recent conversation with faith-based organizations who's exploring turning their building into a resilience hub, they mentioned that there might be some barriers to utilizing federal grant funding to pay for improvements to buildings where the primary purpose is for religious services. Is this a challenge that you all have experienced?
Hey, Hannah, I know you probably have an answer to this, so I want to give space, but I also I see that Thea Becton is on this webinar, who works with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So Thea, I know you've done some terrific work on fund braiding. I'm not going to ask you to talk right now, but if you could send me a link, I'll ask for that to be distributed, because Thea's really done some amazing work in identifying different sources of funding that aren't crossing over in other places. So I want her wisdom to come to this group.
Yeah, that's great. I would say, there's this is just such a true example of like how it requires such a team effort to answer these questions. Like you were talking about earlier, Jenny, that a lot of this federal funding is brand new, and we are still searching for a lot of the answers as well. And I feel like a lot of times we like answer one question and then we find a whole new question that we need to try to answer as well. And so it really like takes this whole team kind of approaching this from multiple angles to figure out what is like the best answer to some of these questions. I know one barrier that we have seen, so South Face just got some DOE funding through the Renew America's Nonprofit grant, and there are some limitations there for faith communities. So faith communities are eligible to apply for the Good Use Grant, which is a grant for energy efficiency. However, at least half of their like building space use must be for non-religious worship activities. And so I think that's one example of how I've seen, some limitations around utilizing some of this funding. However, there are some workarounds to things like that. They have funded faith communities in the past for projects. I know a lot of faith communities have a lot of things happening out of their buildings. They have food pantries, they have daycares, they have preschools. So those are just some examples of how, you might be able to still utilize some of that funding through talking about some of the other mission work that is happening in your faith communities. But I would say, please connect to any of us on this call. We'd love to hear kind of about your specific circumstance, the funding that you're trying to go after. And if that is not available to faith communities, it's likely that there are other funding streams that we could point you to where you could be able to utilize this funding. And the IRA has significantly expanded what we might be able to access and offer to nonprofits and faith communities. So really excited about that as well. We are coming up on our time here, so I think we'll need to wrap up this call. But I wanted to say thank you so much to the Drawdown Georgia team for helping to put on this webinar, for facilitating this conversation today. Thank you again to our panelists for the work that you are doing. And thank you to all of the participants for joining, for being so engaged and asking great questions. You will be getting a follow-up email from the Drawdown Georgia team with a recording to this webinar and to our contact information. And each of the panelists have agreed to connect with any of you who want to talk to them and ask specific questions or just connect about their work even further. So again, thank you so much. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.